I have replayed that moment 1,000 times in my mind. The moment Sarah sat across from me at my kitchen table, looked me straight in the eyes, and told me the real reason my son left. I thought I knew. For 5 long years, I truly believed I knew exactly why David stopped calling. Why he moved halfway across the country without looking back. Why the boy I raised, the boy I gave my entire life to, walked away from me like I was a stranger. I blamed her. I blamed Sarah, his wife. I told myself she was the one who poisoned his heart. I told myself she was jealous of how close David and I were. I told myself she whispered things in his ear at night, turned him against me little by little, until one morning I woke up and realized I had lost my only child. Not to death, not to accident, but to silence. A silence so loud it kept me awake at night. For 5 years I carried that story in my chest. I nursed it. I held on to it the way you hold onto a railing when you feel like you might fall. Because blaming Sarah was easier than asking the question I was too afraid to ask. What if it was me? What if I was the reason he left? I never let myself go there. Not once. Because if the answer was yes, then everything I believed about myself as a mother would crumble. And I could not afford to crumble. Not at 63. Not alone. Not with nothing left but memories and an empty house that used to be full of laughter. But then Sarah came back. She came alone. No David. No warning. Just a knock on my front door on a Tuesday morning in November, the sky heavy and gray, the kind of sky that feels like it is holding its breath. And when I opened the door and saw her standing there, thinner than I remembered, her eyes tired and red, I knew something had changed. I knew she had not come to fight. She had come to tell me something. Something I was not ready to hear. We sat down. She spoke slowly, and with every word I felt the ground beneath me shift. By the time she finished, I was not angry anymore. I was not bitter. I was not pointing fingers or building walls. I was crying. Not because my son had hurt me, but because I finally understood that I had been hurting him for years, and I never even knew it. This is that story, and I am telling it because maybe, just maybe, there is another mother out there who needs to hear it before it is too late. My name is Margaret. Most people call me Maggie. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. My parents were simple, good people. My father worked at a paper mill. My mother stayed home and raised 4 children. I was the youngest. I never had big dreams. I did not want to be famous or rich. I just wanted what my mother had. A home. A husband who came back every evening. Children who sat around the dinner table and told me about their day. That was my dream. Small and warm and ordinary. I met Thomas when I was 22. He was tall and quiet and had the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be all right. He worked at a hardware store in town. He was not flashy. He did not say much. But when he looked at me, I felt seen, really seen, and that was enough. We married young. I was 23, he was 25. We bought a little house on Elm Street with money we had saved and a loan we could barely afford. It was not much, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that was too small, a backyard that flooded every spring. But it was ours, and for a while it was everything. David came along when I was 26, our only child. I had complications during the birth, and the doctors told me I would not be able to have more children. I cried about that for a long time. I had always pictured a house full of kids, noise, chaos, love, but God gave me one, just one. And I decided that if David was going to be my only child, then I would pour everything I had into him. Thomas was a good father. Quiet, like I said, but steady. He taught David how to ride a bike. He built him a treehouse in the backyard one summer. They would sit out on the porch on warm evenings, not saying much, just being together. David adored him. And then Thomas got sick. It started with a cough that would not go away. Then the weight loss. Then the doctor visits that got longer and more serious. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. By the time they found it, there was nothing anyone could do. Thomas died on a Friday in March. David was 10 years old. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, holding David's hand and feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I was 36 years old, a widow, a single mother, no savings, no family nearby. Just me and a boy who had just lost his father and did not understand why. I will not lie to you. Those first few years after Thomas died were the hardest years of my life. I worked 2 jobs, one at the grocery store during the day and one cleaning offices at night. I barely slept. I barely ate. But David was fed. David was clothed. David went to school with his homework done and his shoes clean. I made sure of that. Because that was my job now. I was his mother and his father. I was everything. And I took that responsibility seriously. Maybe too seriously. But I did not know that yet. That understanding would come much later, and it would come with a price. David was a good boy, quiet like his father. He did not cause trouble. He got decent grades. He helped around the house without being asked. On the weekends, he would sit with me in the kitchen while I cooked, and we would talk. About school, about his friends, about nothing important. But those moments were everything to me. I lived for those moments. As David grew older, I began to see more of Thomas in him. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The way he said, "I'm fine," even when he was not. The way he kept his feelings tucked deep inside, like they were something fragile that might break if he let them out. I worried about that. I worried he was carrying too much, but I told myself he was strong, like me, like his father. And strong people do not break. They just keep going. Looking back now, I think that was the first mistake I made. Confusing silence with strength. Confusing endurance with being okay. But at the time, I was too busy surviving to notice. I want you to understand something. I loved David more than I loved anything in this world. More than I loved myself. More than I loved the memory of Thomas. David was my reason for waking up. My reason for working those long hours. My reason for saying no to every small comfort so that he could have something better. And I told him that. I told him often. I do this for you, David. Everything I do is for you. You are the reason I keep going. I said those words with love, every single time. I meant them with my whole heart. I wanted him to know that he mattered, that he was not alone, that even though his father was gone, his mother was right here, fighting for him every single day. I thought those words were a gift. I did not know they were becoming a weight. David graduated from high school with good grades. Not the best, but good. He got into a state college a couple of hours away. I was proud. So proud I cried the day we drove him to campus and helped him carry boxes up to his dorm room. But I would be lying if I said I was not afraid. For the first time in 18 years, I was alone, truly alone. The house on Elm Street felt enormous without him. Every creak of the floor, every tick of the clock, reminded me that the only person I had built my life around was gone. I called him every day, sometimes twice. I asked him if he was eating properly, if he was sleeping enough, if he was studying. He always said yes. He always said he was fine. But sometimes I could hear something in his voice, a tiredness, a distance, that made my stomach tighten. "You know I'm always here for you," I would say. "I know, Mom. Everything I did was so you could have this chance. Don't waste it." "I won't." I did not mean to put pressure on him. I truly did not. But I can see now how those words might have landed differently than I intended. When you tell someone that everything you sacrificed was for them, you are not just saying, "I love you." You are saying, "You owe me something." Even if you do not mean to, even if the thought of a debt never crosses your mind. But I did not see that then. I just missed my son. And reminding him of how hard I had worked felt like the only way to stay connected to him. Like if he remembered what I gave up, he would not forget me. David came home for holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, sometimes a weekend here and there. We would fall back into our old rhythm, him sitting at the kitchen counter, me cooking, us talking about small things. And for those brief visits, the loneliness lifted. Then, in his junior year of college, he told me about Sarah. "Her name is Sarah, Mom. She's in my economics class. We've been seeing each other for a few months." My first reaction was happiness, genuine happiness. My son had found someone. That was a good thing. That was what mothers hoped for. But underneath the happiness, there was something else. Something small and quiet that I did not want to look at too closely. A tiny voice that whispered, "What if she takes him away from you?" I pushed that voice down. I told myself I was being silly. David would always be my son. No girl was going to change that. "Bring her home sometime," I said. "I'd love to meet her." And he did. Sarah came home with David that Thanksgiving. She was pretty, polite. She had dark hair and brown eyes and a calm way about her that reminded me a little of Thomas. She helped me set the table without being asked. She complimented my cooking. She laughed at David's jokes and touched his arm gently when she talked to him. I should have liked her immediately. And part of me did. But another part of me, a part I am not proud of, watched the way David looked at her and felt something cold settle in my chest. He had never looked at me that way, with that kind of lightness, that kind of ease. Around me, David was always careful, always measured. Like he was making sure he said the right thing, did the right thing was enough. But around Sarah, he was different, looser, freer, like he could breathe. I told myself it was normal, young love. Of course he was different around her. That was how it was supposed to be. But the cold feeling did not go away. Over the next 2 years, David and Sarah grew closer. They moved in together after graduation. David got a job at an accounting firm in Columbus, about 3 hours from me. Sarah worked at a nonprofit. They seemed happy. I visited them once early on. Their apartment was small but clean. Sarah had put flowers on the table and cooked dinner. She was trying. I could see that. She wanted me to like her. And I did like her. In theory. In the polite, surface-level way you like someone you have decided to be careful around. But I never fully let her in. I never fully trusted her with my son. Because deep down, I still believed that no one could love David the way I did. No one could understand what I had given up for him. No one could possibly appreciate the full weight of what it took to raise that boy alone, to work 2 jobs, to go without so he could have. And that belief, that quiet, stubborn belief, began to show itself in small ways. When I visited, I would comment on things, small things, the way Sarah organized the kitchen, the fact that the laundry was not folded the way I did it, the brand of coffee they bought. You know, David always liked his shirts folded in thirds, I would say. That's how I taught him. Sarah would nod and smile. I'll keep that in mind, Margaret. But I could feel the tension. It was subtle, like a wire pulled just a little too tight, not enough to snap, but enough to hum. And then there were the phone calls. I still called David regularly, and during those calls I would ask about his life, his work, his plans. But somehow the conversation always circled back to me, to what I needed, to how lonely I was, to how much I had done for him. I'm glad you're doing well, David. I really am. I just wish I had someone here to talk to sometimes. But it's okay. I'm used to being alone. I've been alone since your father died. He would go quiet, and then he would say, I'm sorry, Mom. And I would say, you don't need to be sorry. I just want you to remember. That's all. I did not know what those conversations were doing to him. I did not know that every time I said, remember what I gave up for you, a little piece of him folded inward, like a letter being creased again and again until the paper starts to tear. David and Sarah got married 2 years after college. It was a small ceremony, a park, a handful of friends, me sitting in the front row crying. I cried because I was happy, but I also cried because I felt something shifting, something I could not name, like the ground beneath my feet was slowly tilting and I was starting to slide. At the reception, I gave a toast. I talked about raising David alone, about the sacrifices, about the late nights and the early mornings and the years I went without a new coat so he could have new shoes. I talked about Thomas and how proud he would have been. And I talked about how David was my whole world. The room was quiet, people smiled, a few wiped their eyes. But when I sat down, I saw David's face, and it was not the face of a proud son. It was the face of someone who had just been handed something heavy, something he did not know where to put. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. He did not squeeze back. After the wedding, things changed. Not all at once, slowly, like a season turning. You do not notice autumn arriving until one morning you look out and all the leaves have fallen. David called less. Where he used to call 3 or 4 times a week, it became twice, then once, then every other week. When I called him, he was polite but brief. How are you, David? I'm good, Mom, busy with work. You sound tired. I'm fine. You know you can talk to me. I'm your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You can tell me anything. A pause. I know, Mom, I'm fine, really. But he was not fine. I know that now. He was drowning. Slowly, quietly, in a sea of guilt and obligation that I had filled without ever meaning to. I started visiting less, too. Not because I did not want to see him, but because each visit felt more strained than the last. Sarah was always polite, always gracious, but there was a wall between us that neither of us acknowledged. And David, my David, seemed caught in the middle, pulled in two directions, unable to satisfy either one. I began to complain to my friends, to my sister on the phone, to anyone who would listen. David has changed since he married that girl. She's pulling him away from me. I gave that boy everything, and now he can barely find time to call his own mother. My sister, Dorothy, was gentle about it. Maybe he's just busy, Maggie. Young couples need space. Space, I said. I gave him 20 years of my life. I'm not asking for the world. I just want my son to remember where he came from. Dorothy paused. He remembers, Maggie. Maybe that's the problem. I did not understand what she meant. I thought she was being cryptic. I thought she was siding with Sarah. So I stopped talking to Dorothy about it. And I kept calling David, kept reminding him, kept pulling on the invisible thread that connected us, not realizing that every tug was fraying it a little more. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon in October, 3 years after David's wedding. I had called him that morning to invite him and Sarah for Thanksgiving. It was still a month away, but I wanted to plan. I wanted to cook his favorite dishes. I wanted to set the table the way I used to when it was just the two of us. Turkey with sage stuffing, sweet potatoes with marshmallows on top, pecan pie. David hesitated. I'll have to check with Sarah, Mom. She mentioned something about going to her parents this year. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but clearly, like the sound of a twig breaking under snow. Her parents, I repeated. You've been going to her parents for the past 2 Thanksgivings, David. I've been sitting here alone, eating soup and watching television like I don't even have a family. Mom, that's not. Do you know what I gave up for you? My voice was shaking, but I kept it steady. I always kept it steady. Do you have any idea? I worked 2 jobs. I went without meals. I wore the same coat for 7 winters so you could have what you needed. And now you can't even come home for one Thanksgiving. Silence. Long, heavy silence. And then David said something he had never said before. His voice was so quiet I almost missed it. I know what you gave up, Mom. You've told me. 1,000 times, I know. And then he hung up. Seeing Margaret holding the phone, the dial tone buzzes. She stands in the kitchen, perfectly still. The clock ticks on the wall. Soft strings music plays. He hung up on me. My son, my only child. The boy I had carried inside me, fed, clothed, raised, loved with every breath in my body, hung up on me. I stood there for a long time. I do not know how long. The phone was still in my hand. The kitchen was still. The house was quiet, the way it always was now. Just me and the silence and the weight of something I could not name. I called him back. He did not answer. I called him the next day. He did not answer. I called Sarah. She answered, but her voice was careful, measured, like she was choosing every word. Margaret, David needs a little time. He's going through some things. Please just give him some space. What things? What is he going through? I'm his mother, I should know. I understand that, but right now he just needs some time. Is this your doing? Did you tell him to stop talking to me? A pause, longer than the others. No, Margaret, this is not my doing. This is complicated. Please just give him time. I did not give him time. I called again, and again. I left voicemails, long ones. I told him I was sorry if I had said something wrong. I told him I loved him. I told him I was alone and scared and did not understand what was happening. He did not call back. 3 weeks later, I got a letter, not a phone call, not a visit, a letter, written in David's careful handwriting on plain white paper. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it with trembling hands. Mom asterisk. I need some distance. I don't know how else to say it. I love you, I do. But I need space to figure some things out. Please don't call for a while. I'll reach out when I'm ready. David. That was it. 5 sentences. No explanation. No date for when he would be ready. Just 5 sentences and a signature that looked like it had been written by a stranger. I read that letter 40 times that first day. I held it against my chest. I folded it, unfolded it, pressed it flat on the table and stared at the words until they blurred. And then I put it in the drawer next to the stove, where I kept all the important things. The deed to the house, Thomas's death certificate, David's baby photos. I put the letter in the drawer, and I closed it. And I waited. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. David did not call. He did not write again. I heard through Dorothy, who heard through a mutual friend, that David and Sarah had moved. They had left Ohio entirely. Gone to Portland, Oregon, the other side of the country. When I heard that, something inside me went very still, like a clock stopping, like the last leaf falling from a tree in November. He was gone, really gone, not just busy, not just distracted, gone. I spent the first year angry at Sarah mostly. I constructed an entire story in my mind. She had done this. She had turned my son against me. She was jealous of our bond, threatened by how much David loved me, and she had slowly, carefully, methodically pulled him away until there was nothing left. I told this story to everyone, to Dorothy, to my neighbors, to the woman at the grocery store who asked about David. "Oh, you know how it is," I would say. "His wife has him on a tight leash. She doesn't want him around his own mother." People would shake their heads sympathetically. Some would agree. "That happens," they would say. "Some women are like that." And every time someone agreed with me, I felt justified. I felt right. I felt like the victim of a terrible injustice, a mother who had given everything and received nothing in return. But late at night, alone in the house, when the justification faded and the anger cooled, there was something else underneath. Something I refused to look at. A small, persistent thought, quiet as a heartbeat. What if it is not Sarah? What if it is you? I pushed it away. Every time. I pushed it down so deep I could pretend it did not exist. The second year was quieter. The anger burned out, the way a fire burns out when there is nothing left to feed it. What replaced it was sadness. A deep, endless sadness that settled into my bones and made everything feel heavy. Getting out of bed was heavy. Making breakfast was heavy. Walking to the mailbox was heavy. I stopped calling David. Not because I did not want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid that the phone would ring and no one would answer. Afraid of the silence on the other end. Afraid that if I heard his voice, I would break apart completely. So I just stopped. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. 5 years without hearing my son's voice. 5 years without seeing his face. 5 years of Thanksgivings alone, Christmases alone, birthdays where I baked a cake and put a single candle on it and sat in the kitchen and cried. Dorothy told me I should go to Portland. Just show up. He's your son, Maggie. He can't ignore you if you're standing on his doorstep. But I was too proud for that, and too afraid of what I might find. Afraid he would look at me with the same tired expression I had seen at his wedding, the one that said, "This is too heavy. I cannot carry this anymore." And then, on a Tuesday morning in November, 5 years and 2 months after David's letter, there was a knock on my front door. Sarah, standing on my porch, alone, thinner than I remembered. Her dark hair had streaks of gray that had not been there before. Her coat was too big for her, like she had borrowed it from someone else. And her eyes were red and swollen, like she had been crying for days. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. No words. Just 2 women standing on opposite sides of a doorway, connected by the same man, separated by years of silence and misunderstanding. "Margaret," she said, her voice was hoarse. "Can I come in?" Every instinct in me wanted to say no, wanted to close the door, wanted to protect myself from whatever she had come to say. Because I knew in my gut that whatever it was going to hurt. But I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. Seen the 2 women in the kitchen. Margaret makes tea. Her hands tremble slightly. Sarah sits at the table, staring at her hands. Long pause. I made tea, the same way I always did. 2 cups. Sugar for me. Nothing for her. I remembered that from the one Thanksgiving she spent here. I remembered small details like that. I always had. I set the cup in front of her and sat down across the table. "Is David all right?" I asked, because that was the only thing I truly cared about. No matter how angry I was, no matter how hurt, the first question was always about David. Sarah looked down at her tea. She wrapped both hands around the cup, the same way I did, and then she took a breath. David and I separated 6 months ago, she said. The words landed like stones in still water. I felt the ripples move through me. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I meant it. It wasn't what you think, Margaret. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't anything dramatic. She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. He just went somewhere I couldn't reach him. He went inside himself, and no matter what I did, I couldn't pull him back out. I stared at her. What do you mean? Sarah looked up at me. Her brown eyes were so tired, so full of something I could not quite place. Margaret, I came here because I think you deserve to know the truth. The real reason David pulled away from you, from me, from everyone. Sarah, if this is about something I said. Please, she held up a hand. Please just let me talk. I've been driving for 2 days to get here. I need to say this. I closed my mouth. I folded my hands in my lap, and I listened. Sarah spoke slowly, carefully, like she had rehearsed this 100 times in the car. When David and I first started dating, she began, he told me about you, about how you raised him alone after his dad died, about the 2 jobs, about the sacrifices. He told me everything, Margaret, and I admired you. I truly did. I thought you were the strongest woman in the world. She paused, took a sip of tea. But as time went on, I started to notice something. Every time David talked to you, every phone call, every visit, he changed afterward. He got quiet. He withdrew. He would sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the wall for an hour without moving. My heart began to beat faster. I could feel it in my throat. I asked him what was wrong. He always said nothing. He always said he was fine. But he was not fine, Margaret. He was carrying something. Something so heavy it was crushing him. Carrying what? I whispered. Sarah looked at me, and her eyes were not accusing. They were not angry. They were full of a gentle, exhausted compassion that made me want to look away. You, Margaret, he was carrying you. I don't understand, I said. I know, that's why I'm here. Sarah leaned forward. Margaret, David loves you. He has always loved you. But every time you told him about your sacrifices, about the jobs, the money, the years you went without, he heard something you didn't intend. He heard, you owe me. You owe me your happiness. You owe me your life because I gave you mine. I never said that. You didn't have to, not in those words, but it was there, in everything, in the way you reminded him again and again of what you gave up. I worked 2 jobs for you. I went without a coat for you. You are the reason I kept going. Margaret, you said those things with love. I know that. David knows that. But love that comes with a receipt is not free. It is a debt. And David spent his whole life trying to repay a debt he could never settle. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table to steady them. He tried, Sarah continued. He tried so hard to be enough for you, to make your sacrifices worth it, to be the son who justified everything you gave up. But the harder he tried, the more he felt like he was failing. Because nothing he did, no job, no success, no amount of calling or visiting, ever seemed to close the gap. You always needed more reassurance, more gratitude, more proof that he remembered. Tears were falling now. Mine, not hers. Falling silently down my cheeks and landing on the table between us. He told me once, Sarah said, her voice cracking. He told me that being around you felt like standing in front of a mountain he could never climb. He loved you at the base of it. But every time he looked up, all he could see was everything you had sacrificed, and he felt small. So small, Margaret. Like nothing he could ever do would be tall enough to reach the top. He didn't leave because of me, Sarah said quietly. I know you thought that. I know you blamed me for years, and I understand why. It was easier than the alternative. I could not speak. My throat was closed. My chest was tight. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say she was wrong. That David had never felt that way, that I had only ever loved him. But I could not, because somewhere deep inside me, in the place where I had buried that small, persistent thought for 5 years, I knew. I knew she was telling the truth. He shut down, Margaret. He pulled away from you because being close to you hurt, not because you were cruel, not because you were a bad mother, but because your love came wrapped in sacrifice, and he could not hold it without feeling the weight of everything you gave up. Sarah wiped her eyes. And eventually he pulled away from me too, because the guilt followed him. It was not just about you anymore. It was about everything. He felt like he was failing everyone. Me, you, himself. He stopped sleeping. He stopped talking. He went to work and came home and sat in the dark, and nothing I said could reach him. Is he, I could barely get the words out. Is he okay? Sarah nodded slowly. He's getting help. He started seeing a therapist about a year ago. That's actually why I'm here. His therapist suggested that someone talk to you. David couldn't do it himself. Not yet. He's not ready. But he didn't want you to spend the rest of your life not knowing. Not knowing what? That it was never about not loving you. It was always about loving you too much, and not knowing how to live under the weight of everything that love cost. After Sarah left that afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I do not know how long. The light shifted. The shadows moved across the floor. The house grew dark around me, and I did not get up to turn on a light. I just sat there, thinking, remembering, replaying every phone call, every visit, every conversation. Every time I had said those words, I did it all for you, and seeing them now not as expressions of love, but as bricks. Bricks I had been stacking, one by one, on my son's shoulders since he was a child, building a wall around him that he could never escape. I thought about Thomas, about the quiet way he loved us. He never talked about sacrifice. He never reminded us of what he gave up. He just did it. He went to work. He came home. He built the treehouse. He sat on the porch. He loved us by being there, not by making sure we knew the cost. And I thought about how, after Thomas died, I had turned my grief into a story. A story where I was the hero, the brave widow who gave everything for her son. And that story became my identity. It became the only thing I had. Without it, who was I? Just a tired woman in a small house with nothing to show for her life. So I told the story, again and again, to David, to myself, to anyone who would listen. Because as long as the story was alive, I mattered. As long as David knew what I had done, I had value. But I never asked what the story was doing to him. Scene, flashback montage, Margaret telling young David about her sacrifices. David as a teenager, looking down at his hands. David as a young man, rubbing his temples after a phone call. Each scene brief, each one showing the weight accumulating. I cried that night. Not the quiet, controlled crying I had done for years. Not the single tear rolling down the cheek while I stared at the wall. This was different. This was deep. This was the kind of crying that comes from a place so far down inside you that it feels like it has been waiting there for decades, just waiting for permission to come out. I cried for David, for the boy who sat in my kitchen and listened to his mother's pain and absorbed it like a sponge, because that was the only way he knew how to love me back. For the young man who went to college carrying not just his own dreams, but the weight of mine. For the husband who could not relax in his own marriage because he was still trying to earn something that should have been freely given. And I cried for myself, for the woman I had become without realizing it, the woman who confused love with obligation, who measured devotion by debt, who held on so tightly that the thing she held was crushed. I did not mean to do it. I want you to know that. I did not sit down one day and decide to make my son feel guilty for existing. It was not a plan. It was not intentional. It was the only way I knew how to express how much he meant to me. But that does not make it right, and it does not undo the damage. The next morning, I did something I had not done in years. I went to the drawer next to the stove. I opened it, and I took out David's letter. I read it again, those 5 sentences. Mom, I need some distance. I don't know how else to say it. I love you. I do. But I need space to figure some things out. Please don't call for a while. I'll reach out when I'm ready. And this time, I heard what he was really saying. Not, I don't love you. Not, you don't matter. But I love you so much that being near you is breaking me. I need to step away so I can find out who I am when I'm not carrying your sacrifice on my back. My son had been drowning, and every time I called to remind him of what I had given up, I was pushing his head further under the water, all while believing I was throwing him a lifeline. I sat down at the table with a pen and a piece of paper. My hand was shaking, my eyes were blurry, but I knew what I had to do. I had to write him back. Not the letter I would have written 5 years ago, the one full of hurt and accusation, and how could you do this to me after everything I've done? Not that letter, a different one, the one he needed to hear, the one I should have written a long time ago. I wrote slowly, I crossed things out, I started over, I tore up 3 versions before I got it right, and even then I was not sure it was right, but it was honest, and that was all I had left. This is what I wrote. Dear David asterisk. Sarah came to see me. She told me everything. And I am not writing this letter to defend myself. I am writing it to say something I should have said a long time ago. You don't owe me anything. Not a phone call, not a visit, not a thank you, not a single thing. I raised you because I wanted to. I worked those jobs because I wanted to. I went without because I chose to. Those were my decisions, my choices. They were not your burden to carry. They were never supposed to be your burden to carry. But I made them yours. I put them on you one by one like stones in a bag, and I made you carry them everywhere you went. And every time I said I did it for you, I was adding another stone. I know that now. I am so sorry, David. I am so deeply, painfully sorry. You were never a debt to be repaid. You were a gift, the greatest gift of my life. Being your mother was not a sacrifice. It was a privilege, and I should have told you that. Instead, I told you about the coat I didn't buy and the meals I skipped and the years I was lonely. I turned my love into a ledger and I kept showing you the balance, and I made you believe you could never pay it off. That was wrong. It was not love. It was need, my fear, my loneliness. And I dressed it up as love and handed it to you and expected you to be grateful for the wait. I want you to know that your father would not have done it this way. Thomas loved quietly. He loved without keeping score. I wish I had been more like him. I wish I had let you feel loved without feeling indebted. You do not need to call me. You do not need to visit. You do not need to forgive me. But I want you to know this. If I could go back and do it all again, the late nights, the 2 jobs, the empty Thanksgivings, I would do it all. Happily, freely, without ever once telling you about it, because you were worth it. Not because you owed me, but because you are my son, and loving you was never a sacrifice. It was the best thing I ever did. I love you, David, without conditions, without receipts, without wait. Always asterisk. Mom. I mailed the letter, and then I waited. But this time, the waiting was different. It was not the frantic, desperate waiting of the last 5 years, checking the phone, refreshing the mailbox, jumping at every car that passed on the street. This was a quieter kind of waiting, a patient kind. The kind that says, I have done what I can, the rest is not up to me. I went back inside. I cleaned the kitchen. I made myself dinner, not soup this time, but a real dinner, chicken and rice and green beans. I set a place at the table and I sat down and I ate slowly. And for the first time in years, I was not eating to survive. I was eating to live. The days that followed were hard. I will not pretend they were not. There were mornings when I woke up and the weight of what I had learned settled on me like a heavy blanket, and I could not move. There were afternoons when I sat in Thomas's old armchair and talked to him, really talked, out loud, the way you talk to someone you wish were still here. I messed up, Thomas, I said. I messed up badly, and I don't know if I can fix it. The house was silent, the way it always was. But in that silence, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not forgiveness, I was not ready for that yet. Not peace, that would come later, but something softer, gentler, a kind of letting go. I stopped telling the story, the old story, the one where I was the hero and Sarah was the villain and David was the ungrateful son. I stopped telling it to my neighbors. I stopped telling it to myself. Because it was not true. It had never been true. It was just the story I needed to believe to avoid looking at the one thing I was most afraid of. That I had caused my own pain. I also did something I had never done before. I called Dorothy, my sister, the one I had shut out years ago because she had said something I was not ready to hear. Do you remember, I said, when you told me that maybe the problem was that David remembered too much? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. I remember. You were right. Another silence, and then Dorothy said, I'm sorry, Maggie. For what? For not saying it louder, for not making you listen. I wouldn't have heard you, I said. I wasn't ready. And now I'm ready. We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked. Not the careful, surface-level talking of the last few years, but the deep kind. The kind where you say the things you are afraid to say and the other person holds them for you. Dorothy told me that she had seen what I was doing to David for years, that she had watched me turn my love into a weight and hang it around his neck. But she did not know how to tell me without losing me. So she stayed quiet, and she regretted it. You were grieving, Maggie, she said. You lost Thomas and you were alone and David was all you had. You held on too tight because you were scared. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. I cried again, but this time the tears felt different. They felt like rain after a long drought. Necessary, cleansing. 2 weeks after I mailed the letter, my phone rang. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. The phone rang and I almost did not answer it. I almost let it go to the machine, the way I had trained myself to do. Because hopping and being disappointed had become a pattern, and patterns are hard to break. But something told me to answer. I dried my hands on the towel. I picked up the phone. Hello. A breath on the other end, long and shaking. Mom. The kitchen disappeared. The dishes, the towel, the sound of water dripping, everything fell away. David. I got your letter. We talked for a long time that night. David cried. I cried. We stumbled over words and tripped over silences, and it was messy and imperfect and real. And that was exactly what it needed to be. He told me things I had never heard before, about the anxiety, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being trapped under a mountain of gratitude that he could never properly express. He told me about the therapist who helped him understand that he was not ungrateful, he was overwhelmed. That his love for me was not broken. It was buried, under years of guilt and obligation. I never wanted to leave you, Mom, he said. I just didn't know how to stay. And I said the only thing I could say, the thing I should have said years ago. You don't have to stay for me, David. You just have to live. That's all I ever really wanted. We did not fix everything that night. You do not fix 30 years of tangled love in one phone call. But we started. We started with honesty. And honesty, I have learned, is the only foundation strong enough to build something lasting. David came to visit that spring, just for a weekend. He came alone. He and Sarah were still working through their own things, and that was okay. It was not about Sarah. It was about us. We sat on the porch. We drank tea. We did not talk about sacrifice. We did not talk about the past. We talked about the garden, about the weather, about a book he was reading. Small things, safe things. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the air between us was light. He looked at me at one point and said, "The treehouse Dad built is still there." I looked out at the backyard, the old treehouse, tilted and weathered but still standing. "It's still there. I used to sit up there and pretend Dad was still alive," he said. I'd talk to him, tell him about school, about my day. It felt like the only place where I didn't have to be anything for anyone. My chest ached, but it was a different ache now, not the ache of loss, the ache of understanding. "I'm sorry I took that from you," I said. "You didn't take it, you just filled up all the other spaces, until there was nowhere left to breathe." I nodded. I know that now. I want to share something with you, something I have learned through all of this. Love is not a ledger. It is not a list of sacrifices waiting to be acknowledged. It is not something you give and then hold up to the light to make sure the other person sees how much it cost. Love, real love, is invisible. It is quiet. It does the work and does not ask for credit. It gives without keeping score. It lets go without demanding gratitude. It says, "I did this because I wanted to," and then it stops talking. I spent years doing the opposite. I gave and then I pointed at what I gave. I sacrificed and then I held up my sacrifice like a mirror and said, look at what I did. See me, appreciate me, remember me." And David saw, he appreciated, he remembered. He remembered so well that it broke him. If you are a parent listening to this, I am not telling you that sacrifice is wrong. It is not. Sacrifice is part of love. But when you tell your children about your sacrifice, when you remind them again and again of what it costs to raise them, you are not giving them love. You are giving them a debt. And children were never meant to be debtors. Let your children be free. Let them know you love them without knowing the price. Let them live their lives without looking back over their shoulders, checking to see if they have done enough to justify your pain. Because they will never feel like they have done enough. That is the cruelty of it. The debt you create is a debt that can never be repaid, no matter how hard they try. And eventually the trying will exhaust them, and they will stop, and they will leave. Not because they don't love you, but because they cannot breathe. David and I are still rebuilding. It is slow. Some weeks are better than others. Some phone calls feel easy, and some feel like walking across a frozen lake, careful, tentative, listening for cracks. But we are trying, both of us. And that is more than I had a year ago. He told me recently that he has started painting. Watercolors, quiet landscapes. He says it helps him process things. He says the therapist recommended it. Can I see them sometime? I asked. Maybe, he said, when they're ready. And I said, take your time. I meant it. Sarah called me last month. We talked for an hour. She apologized for how she handled things. I apologized for blaming her. We both cried a little. She told me she was proud of me for writing that letter. She said it was the bravest thing she had ever seen. I did not feel brave. I still don't. But I suppose bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to be honest, when honesty is the hardest thing in the world. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a house on Elm Street. The kitchen is still too small. The backyard still floods in spring, but it does not feel as empty as it used to, because I have stopped filling it with stories about what I gave up and started filling it with gratitude for what I have. A son who is learning to breathe. A sister who answered the phone when I finally called. A daughter-in-law who drove 2 days to tell me a truth that saved my life. And a second chance, small and fragile and imperfect, but real. If you are still listening, I want to leave you with this. The people we love do not owe us for loving them. Our children do not owe us for raising them. Our partners do not owe us for staying. Love that keeps a tally is not love. It is a transaction. And transactions belong in stores, not in families. Give your love freely. Give it without receipts. Give it the way the sun gives light, not because it expects something back, but because that is simply what it does. And if you have already made the mistake I made, if you have already wrapped your love in sacrifice and handed it to someone you care about and watched them bend under the weight, it is not too late. It is never too late to write the letter. It is never too late to say, you owe me nothing. It is never too late to let go. I know, because I almost was too late, and I am so glad, so deeply, endlessly glad that I was not. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with me in this kitchen, in this quiet house, and hearing this story. I hope it helps. I really do.